Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal Nettles. I am with the Orange County Water District. Thank you so much for joining us. I am excited to welcome you to our May webinar, a regional update on Southern California water supplies. California is in the midst of the most severe drought on record, and historic restrictions have been implemented across the state. Our speakers today will discuss the status of current statewide and regional water supplies and actions that are taking place to ensure resiliency in Orange County, Southern California, and beyond. Before we begin, I did want to mention that we are in webinar mode, so attendees are muted to reduce background noise. We do encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. During the Q&A portion, we will do our best to address questions most applicable to the webinar topic and the information presented today. In the event we are not able to get to your question during the time frame allotted, we would be happy to follow up with you after the webinar and provide you with a response and any information you've requested. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the OCWD website and YouTube channel. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers for today. They will each give their presentations and we will have Q&A at the end. Demetri Polyzos is team manager in the Water Resources Management Group of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Mr. Polyzos started his career at Metropolitan in 2006, forecasting water demands. He then focused on Metropolitan's two imported water supplies from the State Water Project and the Colorado River Aqueduct. Mr. Polyzos chaired the State Water Contractors Water Operations Committee, where he led the coordination between the Department of Water Resources and the 27 participating State Water Project contractors, and discussions on key issues and decisions impacting water supplies. In his current role as the Resource Planning Team Manager, he leads the technical staff responsible for conducting the analysis for the Integrated Water Resources Plan, a long-term water strategy to provide Metropolitan service area with reliable supply of high-quality water to meet present and future needs in Southern California. John Kennedy is the Executive Director of Engineering and Water Resources at the Orange County Water District, where he oversees the engineering, local resources, and administrative functions. John is responsible for preparing long-term financial projections and capital improvement programs, acting as liaison with the 19 local cities and retail water districts served by OCWD, developing and administering groundwater basin management programs, developing and implementing capital projects, establishing district water rates for groundwater pumping and annual pumping amounts, purchasing imported water to recharge the groundwater basin, and coordinating groundwater storage programs with regional agencies. John has more than 35 years of experience in the water and civil engineering industry and has worked for OCWD since 1995. I will now turn it over to Demetri, who will begin our program today.
Demetri, you're muted.
All right, sorry about that. Well, thank you again for having me here today. I wish it was under better circumstances, but we are here, unfortunately, in the third year of drought. And so I'm going to provide kind of an overview of where we are with respect to the regional, the region-wide conditions and the statewide conditions. So starting off, who Metropolitan is, we are the regional wholesaler for Southern California. We are comprised of, in our service area, there's roughly 19 million people. We span 6 counties, 5,200 square miles, so it's rather expansive service area. We have 26 member agencies, one of which is the Municipal Water District of Orange County. And of course, one of their water providers is the Orange County Water Districts. And so where do we get our water? Where is our sources of supplies? So About 50% of our water supply is provided through locally produced supplies. So that's groundwater recycling, desal. We consider one of our member agencies is LADWP, so we consider their supplies from the LA Aqueduct also a local supply. And so typically 50% of the water supply or the demand is satisfied through the local production of local supplies. Then Metropolitan supplements that supply with our imported water supplies, and that's from the Colorado River. That's one of our sources, and the associated storage along that system. Typically about 20% of the demand is satisfied through those supplies. And then we also have a contract with the state of California, where we bring in water from Northern California, and typically 30% of the demand is satisfied through that source. These percentages will vary from year to year, and certainly in dry years like the one we're experiencing now in the last couple of years, we've really depended on our Colorado River supplies because of the limited and scarce supplies on the state side. And this is the US Drought Monitor. And so this gives you a sense of how severe the drought situation is. Both imported supplies are in a severe drought, and here locally, we're in a moderate to severe drought situation as well. And so, of course, I think everyone's familiar with our water cycle, but when in terms of looking at the health of our imported water supplies, we really focus in on the watersheds associated with those imported supplies and also the resulting runoff. That's a key indicator of our water supply health. And so what we typically look at is the rainfall, the snowfall, because that's what results into the runoff, which helps fill our reservoirs. And that, of course, is our water supply. And so what we're seeing certainly is a lot of challenges based on impacts from climate change. In particular, the unprecedented warming trend that we've seen. And it's really put the entire cycle out of whack. And it's really challenged our water supply reliability. And I'll give you an example, a few examples of what we're seeing. This is our snowpack graphic for the upper Colorado River Basin. Again, this is the watershed associated with our supplies on the Colorado River. The bluish shaded region is what we typically see in terms of snowpack development and snow melt. The orange line is the current water year snowpack. Now, if you look at this graphic, we're pretty much not necessarily a bad year on the Colorado River this year. But what we're seeing is this disparity between the snowpack peak, which peaked close to the April 1st timeframe, which is typically the peak of the season for snowpack. But the disparity between snowpack and runoff is quite astonishing. And we're seeing this year after year on this system. And this speaks to the warming trend, and could be one of the reasons why we're seeing this is because a lot of that water is getting either it sublimates, so it's evaporating into the air, or it's getting soaked up into the ground because of the dry soil moistures. All of this, again, pointing to climate change impacts. And we're seeing that also on the state water project side as well, which we'll get to in a second here. But all this does not bode well for runoff. This graphic gives us a sense of the runoff on the upper Colorado River system. So this is looking at runoff into Lake Powell, which is one of the key reservoirs on that system. And the runoff here is ranked. So you have the lowest on the left-hand side and the highest on the right. And you're looking at runoffs from the last several years, all the way dating back to 1964. This year's runoff, as you can see here, is below average. The last 2 years have also been below average. In fact, last year was the second lowest on record. So we're looking at year after year of dry conditions as we're now into the third year of drought. Arguably, this system has been in a drought conditions for the last 2 decades. If we plotted the last 20 years or so of runoff, you'll see a majority of that is of the runoff fell below average, with a few years at normal, but only a handful of years above average. So that system has been stressed over the last 2 decades. Does not bode well for our supplies on the Colorado River going forward. And that's taken its toll. Here's a look at Lake Powell. We have seen record low levels. I'm sorry, this is Lake Mead. This is the second key reservoir on that system. And we're seeing record low levels. Every year, we see that we're hitting lower and lower levels in that reservoir. And in fact, the first ever shortage declaration was declared and put into effect this year. Metropolitan will not be impacted by that shortage declaration as of yet. However, if the lake continues to decrease, the lake levels continue to decrease, we could see impacts to our water supply in the very near future, as early as 2024. And unfortunately, the projections for that reservoir continue to show lake levels dropping. Now, switching gears over to the our other imported supplies from Northern California. This is looking at Northern Sierra snowpack. Again, the blue shaded region is the normal snow accumulation and snow melt. The current water year is shown in orange here, and quite astonishing, something we've never seen really before. Our snowpack this year peaked in January. That is very early in the year to peak. That is typically when the snowpack develops. Again, typical peak for snowpack is April 1st. But you see here, we peaked early and low. 61% of the percent of normal as compared to April 1st. So very low snowpack peak. Runoff in the 3 months that we expect the snowpack to increase, January, February, and March, we actually saw the snowpack starting to melt. So very early in the season. This year, we didn't see a huge disparity between the peak and the runoff. However, last year on this system, we did see again, a big disparity between what we saw with snowpack and what the resulting runoff was. Again, that speaks to some of the climate change impacts that we're realizing and observing today. Looking at the runoff on that system, what happened this year kind of took many of us by surprise. We did have a good December last year, and the runoff forecast was above average actually when we got into January. But because of the dry January, February, March timeframe, we saw that runoff decrease. The forecast decreased significantly. That had big impacts on our water supply on that system. Leading into this calendar year, our state water project allocation, which is the supplies we get from the state water project, was at 15% of our normal allocation. Now, granted, that is very low allocation in itself, but because of the dry conditions in the first 3 months of this year, that allocation dropped to 5%, and that's where it is currently, and that's the lowest we've ever seen it go down to. We've seen that before last year, unfortunately, and also back in 2014, but that, of course, is a very, very low allocation. The last couple of years also very low runoff, again, well below average for this system. So both imported supplies we're experiencing year after year now into the third year, very dry conditions. So unprecedented, in fact, the driest 3 years on record, the driest 3 months on record, as I mentioned, January through March here in California, and also the lowest 3 years total deliveries from the State Water Project. So just to give you some context of that, what we typically see over 3 years is roughly just over 3 million acre feet of supply from the State Water Project. Again, averaged over 3 years. What we plan for, worst case scenario, is about 1 million acre feet. And that's consistent with what the Department of Water Resources also has indicated would be the worst that they would be able to provide us, worst case scenario. What we're experiencing today is even less than that. So again, what those climate change impacts have really are hitting us pretty hard and a lot sooner than many of us had expected or even planned for. All right, so this caused a lot of actions taken both by the governor and the state. The governor did start declaring drought emergencies starting back in April for a few counties in Northern California. That expanded to all counties by October of last year. He's called for voluntary reductions in water use of up to 15%. He did that last summer, but as conditions continued to worsen, more recently, earlier this year, he issued an executive order requiring urban water suppliers to implement at a minimum their water shortage contingency plan at a level 2 response action. So that's 20 to 30% reduction in water use. Again, that's reflecting how the worsening conditions in the drought. With respect to the Department of Water Resources, they're the folks that maintain and operate the state water project system. I mentioned that they reduced the state water project allocation from 15 to 5%. They, in recognition of how low a 5% allocation is, they are providing for human health and safety supplies. This is the first time that they've done this, but they recognize that a 5% allocation is very low. And they've done some other things that are not impacting us directly, but they're trying to preserve as many supplies in the key reservoir on the state system, which is Lake Oroville. So they relaxed some of the Delta standards. That's to help preserve water in Oroville. And they've also reinstalled rock barriers in the Delta. That helps to prevent saltwater intrusion into the Delta. So they want to try to release less water from Oroville, but that doesn't help in keeping the saltwater out of the Delta. So they actually put in these rock barriers. So a lot of drastic measures being taken up and down the state. So what does this mean for Metropolitan's water supply demand balances? A quick look here. So the demands on Metropolitan, so this is after our member agencies use the available local supplies that they've developed. Their request of supplies for Metropolitan is roughly 1.8, just over 1.8 million acre feet. Metropolitan's imported supplies, both Colorado River and the 5% allocation from the state, add up to just over 1 million acre feet. So as you can see here, this leaves us with quite a bit of a supply demand gap, 850,000 acre feet. Now, thankfully, Metropolitan still has a fair amount of water in its storage portfolio. And a majority of this gap will be satisfied this year through the use of our stored supplies. However, there is roughly 200,000, just over 200,000 acre feet of water that we still need to come up with. And so that is what we're short this year. And specifically, that is in areas that are the portions of our service area that can only get water from the state water project system. And that's what's highlighted here in the red areas in our service area. So this is typically in the northwestern portion of our service area. Again, these areas are highly dependent on supplies from Northern California. And because of the year after year low state water project supplies and the use of storage over the last couple of years in this area, we are simply do not have sufficient supplies to satisfy the normal demands in this area. So in anticipation or in planning for this kind of situation, we started back in 2020 when this drought started, trying to address this issue. And we did this on 3 fronts. One was by augmenting our supplies. So again, we tapped into our storage over the last 3 years heavily in order to satisfy demands. We purchased supplies from Northern California as well. Those are referred to as transfers. And we also maximize use of our Colorado River. We brought in a full aqueduct over the last 3 years. Even though that system itself has been in a long-term drought, our supplies have not been impacted, and we were able to bring in a full aqueduct over the last 3 years. The other thing that we're doing and started back in 2020 is making some operational adjustments. The key here was to maximize use of our Colorado River supplies. So we made significant adjustments to our distribution system. Things like moving water from DVL into areas that we've never been able to do so before. So that required modifications to the infrastructure, lots of money to be able to move water into areas that typically only get water from the state water project system. We did that actually, we started a lot of that in the last drought. We learn a lot of different things as we go through these droughts. We learned a lot about what our system can and cannot do, and we've started to modify that. We continue to do that in early 2020 and continue to do so today. Again, to minimize use of those scarce supplies on the state water project and maximize use of our Colorado River supplies. We've also partnered with our member agencies where they have flexibility to pull from Colorado River supplies as opposed to meters or service connections that bring in state water. We've shifted those folks over to Colorado River as well. And the third piece in addressing the drought conditions is demand reduction. So over the course of the last 3 years, we've been trying to get the message out that this is severe. This drought conditions is real. We went to a water supply alert. That's our third stage, kind of our DEFCON levels. Our last would be a allocation for the entire region. We've expanded the conservation programs and messaging. We went into an emergency drought declaration last November. Our board declared that. And more recently, because of the drop from 15% allocation, state water project allocation, to a 5% allocation, we went into an emergency shortage declaration. We did this in late April. And again, that's to address the fact that we simply don't have the supplies to satisfy normal demands in portions of our service area. So this emergency shortage declaration is focused in those portions of the service area. Orange County Water District, I should mention, is not part of that area, the emergency shortage declaration. However, we are asking that the entire region do voluntary reductions in water use, and that's part of our emergency conservation program that also came out of the emergency shortage declaration. With the objective there is to preserve our scarce supplies. And we're always thinking about and planning for next year. And so if next year's dry, as we've been seeing, we're going to need to preserve those supplies, all of our supplies, as much as we can. So there's a region-wide reduction of water use, voluntary action to do that. And that's consistent with what the governor's executive order that I mentioned earlier. But specifically for those areas that are dependent on the state water project, we are doing much more dramatic or drastic, calling for more drastic measures and mandatory actions, really focusing on outdoor water use. We're asking for those areas to go down to 1 day a week or something equivalent to that. We recognize that a one size does not fit all. So we're leaving that up to those member agencies in those areas to determine what they feel is necessary to bring down water use. We are tracking and holding those agencies to volumetric limits to make sure that we achieve what we expect a 1 day a week outdoor watering would achieve. Our board did allow for the general manager to go to an even deeper cut if necessary. That would not start until the end of the year, December, but we may go to a complete outdoor watering ban if necessary, if we don't see those gains that we're going to need to see. So I'll leave you with a couple things that we'd like you all to know. This is a record-breaking drought, and the impacts of climate change are here. We're seeing them today. Our water supplies have been stretched thin over the last 3 years. And unfortunately, there are portions of our area that we simply do not have enough water to meet the normal demands. And that's why we seek the public's help to do some severe reductions in their water use. We know that these are extraordinary measures and they're severe, but we are here, Metropolitan and your local agencies are here to help you save water. So with that, I will turn it over to John, who will talk a little bit more specifically about the region here in Orange County.
Thank you, Demetri. So I am going to focus on what's happening in our backyard here with our local groundwater basin. And we'll give you an update on how much water we do have stored in our groundwater basin. Next slide. So Orange County Water District, we manage the local groundwater basin formed in 1933. We protect our rights to water coming down the Santa Ana River. We have a district act that governs our actions. We provide groundwater, and you can think of us as a wholesaler, but we provide groundwater to 19 cities and retail water districts. And we will refer to them as producers. They're producing water out of the groundwater basin. Total of 2.5 million customers within these 19 cities and retail water districts. They have total water demands of about 400,000 acre feet a year. And right now they get about 77% of their water supply from the groundwater basin, pumping the water out of the groundwater basin. And then the other 23% is imported water coming from Demetri. Next slide. Just to show you our boundaries, basically the northwest half of Orange County was blessed by Mother Nature to have a groundwater basin. So if you live in one of these areas, again, roughly 77% of the water you drink from your kitchen tap is groundwater, the other 23% imported. If you live down in San Clemente or San Juan Capistrano, 100% of the water you're drinking is imported water. So groundwater, again, we're blessed to have a groundwater basin. Our reliability is a little bit better, and groundwater is also cheaper than imported water. Next slide. Just wanted to show how over the years, how Orange County Water District has been able to increase the sustainable annual yield of the groundwater basin. We've invested a lot of money in projects and programs to increase the amount of local water supply we have and to reduce, how much imported water that we need to bring into Orange County. So this has greatly increased the security and reliability of our water supply. Next slide. Just wanted to show those 19 producers. They have 400,000 acre feet a year of total water demands. And this is our estimates for next fiscal year. And just to show you exactly where the water is coming from that they're using, we expect them to pump about 295,000 acre feet of groundwater, bring in about 83,000 acre feet of imported water. And then there's 22,000 acre feet of reclaimed water that's used for landscaping. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the groundwater basin here. And this is a cross section of the groundwater basin. A lot of information here, but you can see the groundwater basin looks a little bit like a layer cake. The blue areas represent aquifers, and aquifers are basically sands and gravels, and water travels through the aquifers. And then kind of the light brown areas are aquatards. Aquatards are densely compacted silts and clays, and there's no water. So a city would drill a well maybe 1,000 feet down and pierce these blue aquifers, and then they can pump that water back out and serve it to their residents. So the groundwater basin is very large. It holds tens of millions of acre feet of water. But unfortunately, we're only able to use the very top of the groundwater basin. If you look off to the left side, you see the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean wants to naturally come into the groundwater basin. It is directly connected to some of the aquifers. And as during drought periods, we will draw the groundwater basin down. The groundwater basin is basically an underground storage reservoir. So during a drought, you overdraft your reservoir. So, and I'll show you this later, but we have overdrafted the groundwater basin recently. But as you do that, it encourages the Pacific Ocean to move in and contaminate our water supplies. And we even have injection wells along the coastline where we inject water to help keep seawater from intruding in. But even with that, the ocean can intrude into the groundwater basin if we overdraft it too much for too long of a period. And then Crystal, if you could hit the next button there. So basically, even though the groundwater basin holds a lot more water, effectively, we can only use about 500 to 700,000 acre feet of it. So we basically have a reservoir that holds 500 to 700,000 acre feet. And our policy is to only use 500,000 acre feet, only draw the groundwater basin down by 500,000 acre feet. And I'll talk about this a little bit more on a future slide. Next slide. I did want to show we are part of a larger watershed, the Santa Ana River watershed. You can see Orange County Water District down there to the bottom left. But you can see how big the watershed is. The Santa Ana River starts up in the Big Bear area, comes down through San Bernardino, through Riverside, through Prado Dam, and then comes into Orange County, and then exits out to the ocean. So we try to capture as much water as we can that comes down the Santa Ana River and get it into the groundwater basin. We have a lot of recharge facilities in the Anaheim area. If you're driving by the 91 and 55 freeway and you look off to the north, you see what looks like to be lakes. Those are our recharge facilities where we're capturing water in the river, getting that water into our recharge facilities. Then that water goes down into the groundwater basin and recharges the groundwater basin. And it offsets the pumping that's occurring by the cities and producers. And then one other thing, you know, in the wintertime, we like to look to the mountains. And if it has snowed recently, you see all the snow up on the mountains. You can even see it from Huntington Beach. But that snow, you know, eventually melts, and that runoff goes into local creeks, and then those creeks feed the Santa Ana River. So when you see that snow in the mountain, eventually that water could actually get into your kitchen sink one day. Next slide. So in managing the groundwater basin, we have two primary objectives. One is to manage the basin to provide a relatively high and stable basin production percentage, 75% or greater. The basin production percentage generally controls groundwater pumping. It's currently 77%. And so what that means, if you're a city, roughly 77% of your water supply is coming from the groundwater basin, and then the other 23% is imported water from Demetri in the Metropolitan Water District. So, and because groundwater is so much cheaper than imported water, our producers, our cities like to pump as much groundwater as they can. It can help keep their water rates lower. So we're always trying to maximize how much groundwater is available and provide a steady amount to the producers. But then the second thing we do in managing the groundwater basin is, you know, as I mentioned, it's a storage reservoir, and we want to maintain supplies for drought periods when imported water supplies could be restricted. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Next slide. So this pie chart shows the available water supplies to us to recharge the groundwater basin. And you know, if this was like a financial portfolio, you would say it's well diversified. But it's our available water supply portfolio. And again, it is well diversified. We're not overly dependent upon any one source of water. And I'll just walk through these different supplies quickly, starting in the top right. You see Santa Ana River base flows. Base flows are primarily wastewater treatment plant effluent from cities like San Bernardino or Riverside. Their residents generate wastewater. That wastewater goes to a treatment plant. It has to be highly treated, and a lot of that water gets recharged or gets disposed of in the Santa Ana River. And as I showed you, we're at the bottom of the Santa Ana River watershed, and so we're the recipient of a lot of that water, and then we divert it into the groundwater basin. Moving down to the right, Santa Ana River storm flows. In the wintertime, when we get those heavy storms that blow through Southern California, we're able to capture a lot of that water. We work actively with the Corps of Engineers and how they operate Prado Dam, and we'll capture water behind Prado Dam that we can later recharge. Natural incidental recharge is just rainfall occurring over Orange County. Some of that water gets down into the groundwater basin. On the left side, the groundwater replenishment system, or GWRS. This is our very large recycling project. We recycle a lot of wastewater that's received by the Orange County Sanitation District. And you can see it's a large chunk of water that we recharge into the groundwater basin. We're currently in the process of expanding that plant up to about 134,000 acre feet a year of available water supply. And then up top there, we buy some untreated water from Demetri. Next year, we plan on buying about 25,000 acre feet, and we recharge that water into the groundwater basin also. If you could hit the enter there, Crystal. And then I wanted to talk a little bit more about these two sources of water on the bottom right, storm flows and incidental recharge. These are the two sources of water we get that are directly tied to the weather, to how much rainfall we receive here. And so when we talk about climate change, this is what we're closely monitoring here at Orange County Water District, how it might affect these two sources of water. Next slide. So I took that pie chart and I put it in a table here. And so you see Santa Ana River base flows, storm flows. These are showing the different sources of water we're recharging into the groundwater basin. You go down to near the bottom and you can see we're recharging about 321,000 acre feet of water into the groundwater basin. Now, this is our expectation next year under average rainfall conditions. So average rainfall in Orange County is about 14 inches a year. And if we get average rainfall, we would expect to recharge a total of 321,000 acre feet into the groundwater basin. You can see what expected pumping is from the cities and producers, 295,000. And then you can see we're about 26,000 acre feet to the good. What that means is we would be adding about 26,000 acre feet of supplies to the groundwater basin. Or said another way, we would be reducing the groundwater basin's overdraft. Hit enter there, Crystal. Go ahead, hit one more time, Crystal. So going back to Santa Ana River storm flows and incidental recharge. So under average conditions, we'll get about 108,000 acre feet from those two sources of water. And then I wanted to show if we have a wet year, in an average year is it rains about 14 inches. If we get a wet year and it rains maybe 20 to 25 inches, we would get an extra 50,000 acre feet of water from Mother Nature, which would be very good. And something, we have our fingers crossed that we do get a wet year here coming up. And so at the very bottom, instead of refilling the basin by 26,000, you could add another 50,000 to that. So we would refill the basin by around 76,000 acre feet. So that'd be a great year for us. But then if we have another dry year, those two sources of water may only get us about 58,000 acre feet, which is about 50,000 less. So instead of refilling the groundwater basin at the bottom by 26,000 acre feet, we would further overdraft the groundwater basin by about 24,000 acre feet. So I just wanted to give you a feel for how the weather is impacting the available supplies in the groundwater basin. Next slide. So a lot of information here, and this is showing you how much water we have in the groundwater basin. If that green line was at the very top, the groundwater basin would be completely full. And I literally would be getting calls from the public works director at the city of Huntington Beach that water is oozing up into the streets because there's so much water in the groundwater basin. So we never want that green line to get up to the very top. We always prefer to have a small overdraft in the groundwater basin. And you can see there's a recommended operating range there of around 150 to minus 200,000 acre feet overdraft. You always want to have a little bit of space in the groundwater basin in case you get a couple of wet years. And you need space to put that water that Mother Nature is giving you. So we always like to operate the groundwater basin just slightly overdrafted. you can see on the far right where I show basin operating range. So this is, we operate the basin to completely full to about an overdraft of minus 500,000 acre feet. And I mentioned earlier, if we overdraft the basin more than 500,000 acre feet, we start to incur seawater intrusion problems that may not be reversible. So right now you can see we're about half full or half empty. The accumulated overdraft, we're predicting on June 30, the accumulated overdraft will be around 270,000 acre feet. So you can see the last 2 years we have overdrafted the groundwater basin. And that's what you do. I mentioned the groundwater basin is a reservoir, and during drought periods, you overdraft it. You can see the drought that we had from 2012 to 2016. You can see how we overdrafted the groundwater basin then. But then from 2018 to 2020, we spent about 3 years refilling the groundwater basin. We bought even more imported water from Demetri than we normally would. And we had a couple of wet years and we were able to capture that water. So, but this chart guides us in our actions. And so what happens is, and I mentioned the basin production percentage, the BPP, generally governs how much water gets pumped out of the groundwater basin. And so if the overdraft gets larger than 300,000 acre feet, our board will consider lowering the BPP and reducing how much groundwater is pumped out of the basin, and or buying even more imported water if it's available from Metropolitan and Demetri. And then if the overdraft ever gets larger than 350,000 acre feet a year, our board policy is to lower the BPP, reduce how much groundwater is being pumped, and basically putting the brakes on groundwater pumping. And so, but you can see here, we've had 2 dry years. We're hoping the law of averages kicks in here eventually, and we do get a wet winter or 2 coming up in the near future to help us refill the groundwater basin. But this is the current status of the basin is shown with this slide. Next slide. I did want to mention that we conjunctively operate the groundwater basin with the MWD imported water system. We work to refill the groundwater basin during times of excess imported water, and we do that pretty well. We actually allow the Metropolitan Water District to store imported water in our groundwater basin. We have an agreement that allows them to do that. And we have a second agreement with the Metropolitan Water District. It's called a cyclic storage agreement. And this allows Metropolitan, if Metropolitan has a lot of excess water and they know in the near future that Orange County Water District will be buying water, the Metropolitan can give us the water now when they have it, and then we pay Metropolitan later, a couple years later. So that's another tool, in the toolbox for bringing excess imported water supplies into our groundwater basin and other groundwater basins in Southern California. And then we also maintain a commercial paper program. And what this does, it's like a credit card, because when we do want to buy a lot of imported water, when it is available, you have to pay for it, and it can cost money. We've bought $30 million, $40 million, $50 million worth of imported water in different years. And having this commercial paper program gives you the financial capability to come up with that money quickly to buy imported water when it's available. And then next slide. Did want to point out some actions that we are taking to create additional water supplies. And I already mentioned the groundwater replenishment system, or GWRS. We're expanding it from 100 million gallons a day to 130 million gallons a day. That will increase the plant output up to 134,000 acre feet a year. That project cost $295 million, and it will be completed in the first quarter of 2023. So that'll be very welcome to have that additional local water supply available to us. We're also working actively to increase the efficiency of the groundwater replenishment system. The workhorse of the treatment plant is reverse osmosis. And with reverse osmosis, you're able to capture about 85% of the water you're treating. The other 15% you lose as brines. We're working actively with our research group and testing new treatment techniques to where maybe we can capture up to 94, 95% of the water, and we're only losing 5 or 6% to brines. And so that would boost our local supplies also. The third box there is called Forecast Informed Reservoir Operations, or you'll hear the acronym FIRO. And what FIRO is doing is our ability to predict the weather is a lot better now than it was 20, 30 years ago. The technology is much better. You know, the weather forecasters see those storms out on the Pacific Ocean in the wintertime, and they've gotten pretty good at predicting exactly what area of Southern California they may or may not hit. And that can improve the operations of these dams. And you're looking at a picture of Prado Dam. And the dam, when you operate the dam, you do not have to be as conservative. If you know the storm is going to hit your watershed, then okay, you need to be conservative in operating the dam. But if you're able to predict that that storm's going to go up and hit Santa Barbara or San Diego and not really hit Southern California, then it impacts how the dam is operated, and you can hold more water behind the dam. And the net impact is that we can capture more water through the winter period with these better techniques in forecasting the weather. And then on the far right, we have what's called our Santa Ana Watershed Conservation and Conjunctive Use Project. And I showed you a picture of the Santa Ana River watershed, and we're working with those agencies just to store more water throughout the watershed during times of plenty when we do have excess water supplies, so that when we do get into these drought periods, we're able to, have water available. And then creating additional storage means, with climate change, our weather patterns, we're getting storms, but they're more intense and they're of a shorter duration. So you really need to have lots of storage available. So when it does rain, you have places to put that water that Mother Nature is getting to you. So next slide. That is it for me. And we are available for questions.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Demetri. As John mentioned, it is now time for the Q&A portion of our webinar. If you do have a question, be sure to enter it into that Q&A box. We will try and get to as many as possible. If we do not get to your question, we will follow up with you via email afterward. You can also email us at info@ocwd.com. We will start with a question that came in prior to the webinar beginning, and that is, how can we increase the use of non-potable water in Southern California?
You want me to go, Demetri, or you want to?
Go ahead and I'll follow you.
Yeah. So we're definitely getting better at recycling. I mean, there's non-potable and indirect potable. Our groundwater replenishment system we call it indirect potable recycling, because we're recycling the water, putting it into the groundwater basin, and then people are able to pump it out, and serve it later to their cities. And then the Metropolitan Water District is also working on a plant that would be larger than ours in Carson to basically do the same thing, begin reusing the available wastewater that's in LA to recycle that water and get it into Southern California's groundwater basins. So I think there's a lot going on. And then there's examples of individual retail water agencies that are also developing recycling projects. And Demetri's organization, MWD, also offers a local resources program subsidy to help pay for those projects. So I think there's a lot going on. It's it's not easy. Our groundwater replenishment system took about 10 years from start to actually turning it on. So these are large projects, a lot of infrastructure. The financing can get complicated, the permitting can get complicated, but from what I've seen, we're doing a lot. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I was going to mention the same few projects that we're working on, but it's the key here is diversifying our supply portfolio, looking at all the different things we can do. And we're getting much more involved with recycling, as John mentioned. We're partnering with the LA sanitation districts on the regional recycling water project. It would be, if built out, the largest, I believe, in the nation. And so it's what more can we do with what we have, stretching the supplies that we have, looking what we can do here locally. That is certainly a main focus of ours. It's not about trying to get more on the imported side. We need to maintain those supplies for sure. But it's what can we do here locally, and recycling is certainly part of that, is going to be part of the solution here.
And let me just add, Crystal, when we complete the expansion of the groundwater replenishment system I just mentioned, we will be recycling almost 100% of the available wastewater that can be recycled. So we will have almost maxed out our recycling opportunities here in Orange County.
Thank you both. This next question is for John. Is there any attempt to balance the overdraft of our basin with the adjacent LA basin?
We definitely follow the Los Angeles groundwater basin. Our two basins are connected, and water naturally wants to flow from east to west. So we recharge a lot of water in the Anaheim area, and the groundwater travels and typically wants to go east to west toward LA. So we actually naturally lose some water each year to Los Angeles. They can operate their groundwater basin a little bit lower just because of the geology and the structure of their groundwater basin. We've looked at it. We've looked at ways that we can minimize how much water we lose to Los Angeles, but it's all very expensive, and you're kind of fighting Mother Nature that just naturally wants to send water that way. Yeah, that's just how it is. Yeah.
I have another question for you, John. It relates to the base flow source and the source for the GWS. Both seem to rely on wastewater from upstream. Are the supplies from these two sources impacted by conservation efforts?
For sure. The base flow, Santa Ana River base flow I showed right now is about 75,000 acre feet a year. And that's what's coming into Orange County. And 15 years ago, it was as high as 150,000 acre feet a year. So double what it is right now. Those agencies have gotten smarter in conserving and recycling and reusing their wastewater. And so they're sending us less. Now they have to send us at least 42,000 acre feet a year. That's in a judgment we have. So we watch that very closely. Santa Ana River base flows that we get could go down a little bit more. But that's just how it is. That's the agreement we have with the upstream people. They have to give us a minimum of 42,000, and we're getting more than they have to give us right now and benefiting from that.
This question is for Demetri. LA County was considering their recycled water to Orange County. Is that project progressing? And if so, where will the spreading basins be located?
Which project was this? I'm sorry.
The question just says their GWRS, so I'm assuming.
Actually, I'm not familiar specifically, so I don't want to misspeak, but we can look into it and respond back, make sure we.
And I can just say one thing there, Demetri. Yeah, we are in line to maybe get some water from the Carson project that Met is looking at, but it would be a future phase. So there's some other people who have stepped up and said they could take the water sooner than us. The one issue we have when Metropolitan builds just this giant plant, it's like a $3 billion project, and Met needs people to guarantee they will take the water. When we take the water, we could take water in the summertime, but maybe not in the winter. In the wintertime, our recharge basins could be filled up with Santa Ana River water supplies. So we're not a good customer for Met at the moment. We're trying to figure that out, how we could take, more water in the summer and maybe not any in the winter. But we're definitely following the project, and we could be taking water from that project in the future.
Yeah, and I don't have the specifics, but I know there are 3 or 4 various basins that we're looking towards for spreading that water. So, but we can provide more details.
Next question, how much potential conservation is there in landscape irrigation reduction?
There's a lot more. Typically typical residential house, maybe 40–45% of the water they use is landscaping. So there's definitely more potential. My wife and I walk our streets in our neighborhoods, and we see more and more people taking out their front yards and putting in turf for California native landscaping. So I think that trend will continue. And Demetri can tell you, and it's happened here also, we continue to see total water demands decline.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is because of people getting more efficient and taking out their lawns. And
Yeah, and we've done a lot, the entire region, indoor water use and being more efficient indoors with more efficient devices and what have you. Right now, and that's why you're seeing in these emergency conservation programs, we are focusing outdoors because there's a lot to be gained there. There's a lot of waste that is occurring, and there's a lot of ways. We're not necessarily saying you have to take your lawn out, but be smarter about how you water it. And so there are a lot of opportunities out there. There's rebates on devices, on smart controllers and what have you that can go a long way in saving a lot of water. However, if you are interested in taking your lawn out, we definitely support that as well. And we can see some significant gains. So again, that is why the current focus of these extraordinary conservation measures, mandates that we're putting in portions of our service area is focused on outdoor, because we can see the largest gains in the smallest amount of time, which is what we're going to need to see to get us through this year and potentially dry future years, consecutive years.
In the beginning of the presentation, it was shown on a slide that local water supply makes up about 50% of water supply for the Southern California region. How would programs such as Safe Clean Water Program and the Regional Water Recycling Program, once implemented successfully, improve the 50% number?
Well, I'll just say generally, the more our member agencies across the service area are able to use locally produced supplies, that obviously will then increase. They would decrease, I should say, their dependency on Metropolitan, their dependency on our imported supplies and any water that we have stored. So any gains there, you'll see those percentages shift more on local supply versus the need for imported.
Next question. When do your demand projections for next year, or when you do them for next year, would they include some probability that OCWD will perhaps demand more imported water if it sees it's overdrafting too much? It seems that buying more imported water is a drought mitigation strategy that OCWD has in its back pocket. But perhaps this request will come at a time when Metropolitan imports are becoming more scarce.
Yeah, and we work with our member agencies to look at ranges of potential demands on us. And our long-term planning also considers ranges for what folks think, that they would see their demands being going forward. So we consider that in our planning as well, with not just the year ahead, but also the future years. So we work with MODOC, for example, the Municipal Water District of Orange County. Of course, Orange County Water District is a member of. So through that process of coordination, we try to get a good sense of what our what the demands would be on Metropolitan, and we plan for ranges across the board for all our agencies.
And from OCWD's point of view, we will be following closely what happens next winter as the groundwater basin becomes more overdrafted. If it does become more overdrafted, we need to be nimble and able to quickly, change direction and maybe buy more met water than we thought we needed. I mentioned that's why we maintain that commercial paper program. It gives us the financial capability to buy more met water if necessary. And then if it is dry, that means our recharge basins up in Anaheim don't have any water in them, but that means we can buy met water and get it quickly recharged into the groundwater basin. So it's a balancing act. It's expensive. We raised our rates 10% here this past year. That was a very hefty rate increase. So you're kind of balancing your cost, your rates, and managing the groundwater basin and keeping water supplies available. And then, and then I go back, if we have one wet year, it could almost fill up the groundwater basin. So we'll see. But we'll be watching closely this winter how the weather turns out.
And I did want to mention it is 11 o'clock, but John and Demetri have graciously agreed to stay on a few extra minutes to answer some of these additional questions coming in. But as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded so that if you are not able to stay past this 11 o'clock time, you can always look back on it and see those answers. So the next question, is there a time limitation on the agreement for the Santa Ana River flow?
No, it's forever. We adjudicated the Santa Ana River flows in 1969. It's called the Santa Ana River Judgment, and as far as I know, it continues forever. Yeah. So that resolved years of litigation and the attorneys fighting over who gets the water. So so the answer is no. Yeah.
All right. What role do you anticipate desalination will play going forward?
Well, I guess I can start. Most people are aware about a week and a half ago, the California Coastal Commission denied the project we were looking into, the Poseidon Huntington Beach project. The project could not be developed to where it satisfied the Coastal Commission's concerns about impacts to the ocean, and could not provide sufficient mitigation. So the Coastal Commission denied it. There's a project down in Doheny right now, a smaller project being developed that may get approved. We'll have to see. I mean, the governor has said ocean desal will be part of our future. I think the hard part will be finding sites that can accommodate ocean desalters without, impacting the ocean. So I think as water supplies get tighter, it will become more economical to develop ocean desalters, which are more expensive, but eventually I think they will be part of our portfolio.
Yeah. Agreed, and it's something we're supportive of. It's just where we are, where the technology is, the difficulties in permitting, as John just mentioned. There's some hurdles to get past, but as our water supply reliability, if it continues to decline, I think all of these options should be on the table. So we're not discounting anything. It's just we need to further progress on the technology. We need to address the challenges that it has on the environment. It's power intensive. So all these different things we need to fold into the decision making and understand the cost of these types of projects. But it should definitely be something that we keep on the table and keep investigating and see. At some point, it may be an option that is much more viable for us. But it seems, at least right now, it's not getting the traction. It's not getting the permitting. It's not getting the approvals today. But again, going forward, we got to keep it on the table and see when it is right for going.
Next question, lack of storage in Northern California appears to be an issue, as well as water storage infrastructure. Is that being addressed?
Yeah, and what we're seeing is with climate change, the way the system was built, it's not doing well with what we're seeing with the impacts of climate change. So the size of the reservoirs worked well when you have a snowpack that exists and melts over time. What we're seeing with climate change is much flashier storm systems. We're seeing inflows. We're seeing more precip, more rainfall, less snow. So the system, you're right, is not built to handle that. So in that respect, one could argue that it was undersized. It is undersized. There are projects or plans in place to try to address this, to modernize the system. But again, those they seem to not get as much traction. They seem to hit many walls. There's some environmental challenges. There's cost, issues involved. It will take time to get the system to keep up with the changing conditions. But you're right, and I agree. There are things that need to happen. Modernization of the system is needed to handle kind of how the supplies are being developed nowadays. So we're not quite there yet, and that's one of the reasons why we can't solely depend on our imported supplies. We need to see what we can do locally, but we are working with the state to try to modernize the system.
This next question is for you both. If the drought continues for another 2 years, what does water reliability look like, say, in year 6 of the drought?
Well, I can start. So we do have a fair amount of water in storage. What we're seeing, though, because of the acute issues with the state water project and the scarcity of supplies from that system, there are portions in our service area that are more challenged right now because of that. And we can't get that existing storage we have to those areas. We're working on correcting that. We're working on addressing those infrastructure issues, making the system more flexible, getting the water where we have it, getting it to places where we need it. But in the short term, if we do see, it's going to take time to address those and to put those things in place. So in the short term, if we do see dry next year or the following year, I think we should all expect to see expansion of these drastic conservation measures. We have a bit of a buffer with our existing storage, but again, the water is finite. So if we have as bad as what we've seen next year, as bad as dry conditions, I can see these mandates, conservation mandates, expanding to more portions of our service area.
I just agree with what Demetri said, and 2 or 3 more years of these continued conditions, and we could see bans on outdoor landscape watering. But hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully the law of averages kicks in and we get some precipitation here.
And I'll just mention, the more we can do now to preserve as what we have, to stretch it out, the better we'll be, to get us to. It doesn't take much. One wet year can restock our storage portfolios and what have you. But we are where we are, and we all need to do our part to conserve as much as we can.
And one final question for you both, which the oh so exciting topic of water rates. Is there an appetite for raising water rates to cover operating costs?
Well, yeah, that gets into each individual city and producer and their water rates. But I think water rates are only going to increase. I mentioned how we just increased ours 10%, and that's going to get passed through. I think, Demetri, you increased yours 3 or 4% this year.
That's right.
You have projections for 5 or 6% in future years. So it's just going to become more costly to bring water to the residents. And water right now, a typical water bill in Orange County is $65 to $70 a month. So everyone can expect that to go up, but it really depends on your retailer, your city, or your retail water district, exactly how they're going to pass through some of these increases and how quickly they'll pass them through.
Thank you both so much. For those of you who submitted a question that we did not get to, we will follow up with you via email after today's webinar. So keep an eye out for that. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded. It will be posted to the OCWD website as well as our YouTube channel. I did want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much. And let me just bring up, sorry, one more screen here. And it doesn't want to work, so we'll just leave it up. There we go. Thank you. So you can see our email address there as well. So if you did have any additional questions as a follow-up, feel free to email us them and we will follow up with you. My thanks again to John and Demetri, and to all of you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.